and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so pleased that finally, we are having Jonathan Nevair on to talk about his books. Well, specifically Stellar Instinct, which has come out very recently by the time you're listening to this. I realized I don't actually know your release date, Jonathan.
December 1st.
Okay, so very, very recently. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Like you said, it's been too long. I'm super excited to finally be here to talk to both of you.
Yes.
Now you're going to see how the sausage is made, and you're never going to listen again.
Yeah. The magic will be gone.
I've been warned.
Well, before we start discussing Stellar Instinct, let's start with something great that happened recently. And usually I pick on Sarah, but Jonathan, you said you had something prepared for us.
Oh, I do actually. So I went last weekend to the beach, and this was a super special treat for me because I don't live near the beach, but I grew up on the beach. So last weekend I was lucky enough to go home and visit family, and I stayed at a little Airbnb, which was literally a stone's throw from the beach. And I got to take some long walks with Cricket and really just have the whole beach to ourselves. And there's something just for me, I don't know, it's like in my DNA, and it's just like getting back to that boundary between land and sea. I don't know, it just nourishes me, and it had been too long. And so that was amazing.
That sounds delightful.
It really was.
I was creeping on pictures of Cricket, your dog, earlier before we started the recording. Very cute.
Cricket is so cute.
100% approved.
She's a handful, that's for sure.
All the best pets are.
Yeah.
My good thing is that I bought an arbor from the local nursery, and I put it in and planted one of my climbing roses. So eventually I will have an arbor covered in buff beauty.
Ooh, sounds beautiful.
Yeah, I was really excited. This is something that I've wanted to do for a while, and the arbors are not always in stock at the nursery. So when it was there, I was like, okay, I wasn't planning on doing this right now, but fuck it, I'm buying it anyway.
So what is buff beauty? Because I'm thinking like, buff. What is buff beauty?
Buff beauty is a climbing rose. It's a kind of like a buff, ivory color. Very prolific, very pretty. My parents have one, which is partly why I wanted it, because I was like, that's a pretty rose.
Nice.
And it's hardy. So it will take my neglect.
The best kind of plant.
Yes.
Well, I don't get all the credit. Daniel does most of the work. We bottled our tomato wine, a highly experimental tomato and jalapeno. We're calling it Screamin' Bloody Mary.
Have you tried any yet?
It's really good. It doesn't really taste like wine. You can't go into it expecting white wine. It looks like white wine, but it does not taste like that.
Interesting.
We did bring a bottle to Thanksgiving, and our very sweet relatives said, interesting.
Is that a base of wine? Like, is wine the base, or is it just made from tomatoes and jalapenos?
It is wine fermented from tomatoes and jalapenos. So It's not like infused or something. It's like that's what we use to make it.
I've never heard of that. That's amazing.
There are no grapes in it, right?
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, because you can ferment anything. I think wine just refers to like the type of yeast you use and the fermentation process it goes through. My husband has been tormenting me with tales of milk wine, and I refuse to believe that that's a real thing.
That I think that is maybe a step too far for me.
Yeah, that might be a line.
The weird fruit, let's do it. Speaking of wine, what is everyone drinking? It is only 11 in the morning for me, so I'm actually drinking coffee for once, like a reasonable person.
I am also on the non-alcoholic train this morning with some tea.
I have some honey peach white tea.
That sounds delicious.
It's about 2:00 here, so it's like, yeah, it's raining and it's working.
Incredible. Well, I'm going to be the most caffeinated one, so sorry in advance, everyone. All right, we have our wonderful, comforting hot beverages. It's a rainy day for some of us. What's everyone reading other than Stellar Instinct, which we will talk about more fully in a moment?
I am about 150 pages from the end of Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, which shouldn't really count as an answer for this question because it is, in fact, a podcast book.
But you're much farther into it than I am.
In that I have started it at all, yes.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan can see just the like existential terror in my eyes. That's what my day is today. All right.
I recently finished a advanced copy of Empress and Soldier, which is a new book by Marion L. Thorpe. Have you ever read any Marion's books either?
I haven't.
Okay.
She's on my TBR because I've heard really, really good things, but I haven't gotten around to them. Yeah.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah. And so this is her latest in the Empire series, and it's a historical fantasy that's based on the late Roman Empire, and it's set in a kind of an imaginary version of the British Isles. And Marion's research is just so incredible. And she really tweaks and subverts a lot of things around gender and socio-political sort of aspects of that world. And I just finished it not too long ago, and it was amazing and kind of was a bigger book than her other books, which was interesting. And it kind of inserts itself between 2 and 3 in her series, which was kind of unusual, but that was really wonderful. And if I can like break the rule a little bit, I just wanted to shout out that I just finished watching Andor, and it was unfreaking believable. So I had to get that in there, being a huge Star Wars fan. Andor was mind-blowingly good. So I'm still riding the high of that one.
I've heard good things about Andor. Apparently it feels more like a love letter to the world than some of the other recent adaptations, perhaps.
Yeah, and it's really gritty, and the writing is incredible. And there's no, there's not that kind of mysticism that you get in the other ones with the Force and whatnot. It's a really kind of, meat and potatoes down ground level. It has some heisty stuff in it. It has some thrillery stuff in it. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Well, speaking of heists, that's not exactly what we have going on in Stellar Instinct, but that was the best segue I could come up with. In the book that we're speaking about today, it's more of a secret agent sci-fi adventure. And so my first question for you is it possible to write a secret agent story without evoking James Bond?
I don't know. Did I? Pretty much, whether we like it or not, that's the foundation, right? That's the basis for a lot of the secret agent tropes. And I wanted to kind of start from there, but I wanted to just make sure that I did some surgery and got the sexism and the misogyny and maybe some of the colonialist stuff kind of out of there, and tried to kind of keep what was left, whatever organs were left from that. And I don't know why I'm on this weird, autopsy thing, but anyways, just kind of use that, but pull it out into a galactic sort of space opera setting. But yeah, I don't know. Can you? I don't know if you can. I definitely was nodding to the tropes of a kind of James Bond world through the whole book. And I went all in on the tropes for sure.
Oh, and it was delightful. We specifically used the word evoking because I don't think anything in Stellar Instinct felt like a reference, right? There was nothing that direct or strong, but I think it's just impossible. And I don't think a book would be good if it tried to ignore James Bond, because that's impossible. It's what's in the reader's head, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So you have to kind of acknowledge that. I mean, the gadgets, I think, for me, the funnest part, where it's like, oh, yay, this part is always the most exciting when you get there.
Gadgets are so fun. I mean, I had so much fun thinking about what you can do. And that's what was nice, I think, also about leaving the primary world, was by going into the secondary world, almost like a soft science fiction environment, I could really do things with the gadgets without having to worry about them having a kind of current day scientific explanation, which was really fun.
Were there any gadgets that you came up with, or really any like aliens or worlds too, because we see a lot of really cool aliens and locations, but were there any that you came up with that you ultimately weren't able to use?
I don't think so, because I think what I did was I mapped out the book really by looking at what you would normally see in a lot of these really secret agent sort of narrative structures and the beats that you get in them. And then I kind of went to a lot of the old books that I'd read and the movies I'd watched, which I kind of didn't even need to go back to because it was part of my childhood. I mean, I just was so into that stuff when I was a kid. I kind of built the gadgets around what I needed a scene to do. So I didn't start from the gadget, I started from the scene. And then when I needed to do something, let's say intel gathering, right, or have this person be able to do something in a clandestine way, that was when the gadget sort of appeared. And I was able to mesh it together with a kind of fashion, in one case, a fashion item, right, and a visual enhancement.
That one was really cool. I think that one actually might have stuck out for me the most.
I was going to say the same thing, and also compliment you on the excellent jewelry choices for that.
Thank you.
It made me want the necklace, even if it couldn't do the cool thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of fun. Like, it was a little side project. I was like, are there back necklaces? Oh my gosh, there's like an entire global historical tradition of back necklaces. This is really cool. Some of them are really beautiful. So yeah, fun stuff.
So speaking of being able to flex your creative muscles in this other world, can you tell us a little bit about how you used the science fiction setting to comment on our familiar world? The quote that made me ask this question was, getting 20 days of paid vacation to survive the whole year, or something to that effect. Made me throw up in my mouth a little bit. Not in a bad way. I mean, obviously in a bad way, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think on the micro, you're right, there's those little digs like that in there, which really are about the way that, you know, here we're in this galactic universe where still we're seeing the same kind of problems with labor and the grind and classism and things like that. And then you've got someone like the main character, and I won't spoil much, but, you know, you've got this entrepreneur who's sort of the bad guy, and that's stated at the beginning of the book right away. And it's modeled off of someone who we all probably know. If we are, you know, listening to birds sing and things like that, we're probably familiar with who that is, mixed with somebody else. But yeah, I mean, I think that part of it was maybe getting into some of the ways that, you know, there were parallels there. And I don't know, you're making me realize maybe I did it a little more than I even knew I did consciously. But, you know, she's kind of the exception. You know, Lilene is like, it's the dream. It's like she has this amazing job that keeps her from the grind, keeps her from that kind of a world, gives her all these extraordinary adventures, but it comes with a price.
And we'll talk more about that price in the spoiler section.
It's funny that you mentioned the main villain being directly referencing a couple of real world people. I had been wondering, given everything that's going on with a certain bird site,
and that happened after, by the way, the book was done. But
I was thinking this is kind of an unlikely parallel or prescience, you know, that because I thought that the book had probably been written first. Yeah, you definitely can see the parallels there.
Yeah, you know, and I mean, I think that's that's on everyone's mind right now too, is the disparity, you know, that we have is incredible, and the power that comes with it, and that's definitely in there for sure. Mm-hmm. But, you know, she's also got problems with some aspects of also some things that I think have become quite popular lately in our world too, like statistics, and how statistics have really become one of the main means by which people make decisions. You know, in sports right now, it's like a huge system that's used, right, to analyze and make decisions in football and whatnot. And so that was also in there a little bit too.
You mentioned planning out the book before you came up with the gadgets and locations. So it sounds like you plan quite a bit when you write.
When I wrote the other 3 books, which was a space opera series, I did not plan to the extent that I planned with this book. And that had to do with the fact that this was a thriller. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it was like there's certain expectations that readers have, and that I think you have to follow in a way to have a thriller be a thriller, right? You got to hit certain beats, and, you know, certain things have to happen and readers expect them. And so there was kind of a skeleton already there. And I do usually have a skeleton when I plot and plan for whatever I do. But in this case, I did go further, and I actually laid out most of the story, and I got some really good advice, which was to work backwards when you do a thriller. And that was a really smart thing to do, because in some of my other books, I have spent months agonizing and torture at the beginning of Act 3, literally like about to die because I can't figure out how to end the book. And with a thriller, you have to have I felt like I had to have all that in place because there's so much going on, like red herrings, MacGuffins, like, misdirections, a betrayal that's going on that it has to be there implicitly, right? But can't be explicit. And so I needed all that there. So I did a lot of planning.
I had been wondering about the difference between writing this, which is a standalone, versus writing the Windtide trilogy, which is obviously a trilogy, but it sounds like it might have been more different from kind of like a genre perspective than necessarily standalone versus trilogy.
Yeah, I mean that the first book in the trilogy was a standalone because like when you're starting, you oftentimes are like querying and doing things where you have to advertise yourself as like, this is a standalone with serious potential. This is like the line everyone uses, and so it has to have enough closure to like be its own book and autonomous, but it needs to also be like, but I can write more. And so it was kind of in that zone. But yeah, I would say it was more of a genre-based sort of decision that I had to do to take that plotting route, and I did push off a lot. There were a lot of promises that I could make, especially in like book 2 of that trilogy, or things from book 1 where I just didn't want to deal with them in book 2. So I just pushed them to book 3 and just let them ride and kind of just dropped enough hints to be like, there's still that promise. I haven't forgotten about it. And then of course, when you get to 3, it's like, oh my God, it's like you have this. And I did. Brandon Sanderson has these great writing lectures on BYU that he does. And I had listened to him and he was like, make a list of your promises. And I had this list when I got to the end of that 3rd book. It was epic. And so I made a list with Stellar Instinct. And I really tried to have closure on all of those by the end. So it was more of, I think, a genre, probably. You had to let a lot of stuff go with the thriller that you could really have included in the space opera.
You mentioned that this was a thriller, and I was really impressed with how this book mixes that sci-fi action adventure with some extremely thoughtful moments of introspection. And then you kept doing it with more and more things.
Oh, I want to know what these are. Okay.
We have the internal and the external.
Okay, great.
And then we also have the inclusion of poetry, which I absolutely loved. And, it works perfectly, seamlessly in the book because it's Lileen who's writing the poetry.
Right.
And so we got that added element. And then, of course, we also have the 3rd person and 2nd person points of view.
Yes.
And so did you have to make any special considerations to balance all of these things while you were working on the book?
Okay, so I feel like there's 2 questions.
I threw a lot at you.
I'm going to put the POV one aside for a minute and do the first one. So like the thing about the secret agent story, like a Bond story, is it's a real kind of a flat character arc. It's like a superhero. Like they already have all their powers and skills. And so it's like you're just putting challenges in front of them. And are they going to be able to conquer them? And so I really wanted an arc for Lileen. And so I thought, I'm going to create this kind of like sub-level where, there's a flaw and there's a want that, she has. And so that's where the poetry really worked wonderfully, because I felt like it gave me the ability to have a character arc and some development there that would have been missing if it was just that kind of action secret agent approach. And what happened just intuitively was the poetry, I needed a flaw. Like I wanted her to not be amazing. And so, she sucks at poetry. And, it was easy to do because I suck at poetry. So I was like, this is a win-win. I just write bad poetry for Lileen, and it's wonderful. Then that link happened where it was like, oh, the anonymity issue is the kind of connection where like she wants to be a poet and wants to have an identity, but she has a secret identity. And so that was the nice way that I was able to kind of tie those 2 together. And then about the POVs, I mean, my beta readers were totally split on the 2nd person stuff. Half of them were like, don't like it. Another group of them were like, there was 2nd person? Oh, I didn't even notice. Now that you mentioned it. And I was like, well, that's good. And then the other ones were like, yeah, I really like it. And so they were split down the middle. And I know it's not going to land probably with a bunch of readers. But I really wanted to use it because I felt like in gaming, especially in tabletop RPGs and things like that, you use a lot of 2nd person to kind of immerse someone in that other worldly space. And with the virtual environment, I wanted to get the reader in there. And so 2nd person was intriguing. I had done a couple short stories in 2nd person. And so I wanted to try it. And I was going to use like the pronouns of she and he. But what that did, I felt like, was it pulled the reader further out in a way. And so I chose the you to put you into the actual bodies and experience of a couple of the characters in the second person when they're in those virtual spaces.
It was super weird. I loved it. Every time a second person chapter came up, I felt like I was solving a little riddle. Like, okay, like which character is this? Let's
right.
the context clues and figure it out.
That's cool.
And you did. You basically told us within like the first paragraph of those chapters who you was.
Right.
Who you are.
Was it weird?
But in a good way. Like you don't get second person a lot and it's fun.
Yeah.
So yes, but good job.
Yeah, I hadn't been expecting it. I think it's really funny that we're reading 2 books with second person in such close succession. Just a funny way that worked out.
I have no justification for why I like second person but hate first person. There's no good reason for that.
Oh, well, good thing I didn't put that in there.
I don't always hate first person, but I tend to dislike it. Gosh, we have dropped a couple of hints of things that we really want to talk about, but can't yet because we haven't gotten to the spoiler warning. So before we get there, Sarah, why should you read this book?
You should read this book if you want a fun adventure thriller set in space. I really like the term sci-fi, which you use on the front cover. I think that's very fun and evocative of what this book is. But it doesn't suffer, like you mentioned, it doesn't suffer from some of the issues that more James Bond-esque stories do. And you get a really great character arc. So there's character development too. It's everything you want in a book. It's just fun. You should read it.
Agreed.
That's so nice. Thank you. I'm so glad you got the fun out of it too. Because, I wrote that last trilogy and it's a very heavy, serious trilogy. And I wanted to move into something. I needed to do something fun. And I'm glad that came across. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it was delightful. It was a joyous romp in space.
Can I quote you on that? A joyous romp. That's
yes.
Wonderful.
But still underpinned by the really like serious, thoughtful moments that we get with the main character, and not just the main character. Several of the characters, we get to hear some of their internal struggles, which I think really elevates it from, people are shooting at each other on a spaceship, which is great and fun.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's more than that.
It's very, very fleshed out.
Yeah.
Well, I've recently started playing video games, like not that long ago, right? And I'm not very into the shoot parts of video games. I'm more into the world and the story parts. Like I don't mind it pew pew pew, here and there, but I'm not into, like you were saying, Lily, the first person stuff. Like the first person shooter stuff isn't really appealing to me. So
me too. Have you played Disco Elysium yet?
No, right? I just started Elden Ring last night.
That's a big one. That'll take you a while.
Yeah, I've been doing Mass Effect and Skyrim. So I'm like way behind. I'm like 10 years back.
Well, you're in for a treat. To avoid spoilers, skip to 44:27. I can't believe you played with my heart like this, with Carbrook and his horrible betrayal. How could you do this?
Did you see it coming?
I'm not. Before it was revealed officially, yes.
Okay.
Sarah and I had a debate over who we thought it was.
Yeah,
though.
That's all I needed to hear. Yeah. That's a successful thriller. Yeah, that's great.
So, like, you do make it clear that something kind of sketchy is going on, but I thought that maybe the hacker 2112 was going to be Pin because she was new to the organization. She was super, super smart, like clearly way above Carbrook. I mean, so I was thinking maybe something funky is going on there. And I was completely wrong.
That's awesome. I'm sorry, Lily, but I'm really glad to hear that because that kind of like, uncertainty, misdirection is, like what you shoot for. So some people get it right away. Some people don't, some people are, I guess, and then shift and whatnot. And that's just awesome to hear. But I'm sorry about Carbrook, but he redeemed himself a little bit at the end.
He did. I'm glad that Lileen got to verbally smack him around a little bit. Yes. He tried to pull I had no choice. She was like, no, dude, that doesn't fly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My beta readers were really helpful with that. I mean, I have to say, like, beta readers are gold. They find plot holes and, they give you those moments where you're like, you she needs to dig into him a little more here.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, okay.
As the reader, I need to hear someone tell him what I want to tell him.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, for me, it was at some point he calls himself the best hacker in the world. And that was exactly how 2112 described themselves. And I was like,
That's a drop. Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But then, of course, it's or is that intentional misdirection? So, you know,
Right.
never know until the fingernail reveal. Gross.
Oh, I know. It was like my mom actually is my like first beta reader for everything, because I need her to like tell me, oh, your book is wonderful, and before everyone else like reads it, and it's like, you got to do work on this thing. But I was like, Mom, the nails, the reveal, and she was like, the what? And I was like, you missed it? And she totally missed the nails thing. And I was like, how could you miss the nails thing? So I had to go back and like put like 4 or 5 more nail scenes in. So, yeah. A lot of biting nails, sadly.
Yes. And me reading it too, going, what's going to happen? You also break our hearts with Inti.
Inti.
We had so little time to get to know him.
I was so sad.
Well, I don't know what to say. I mean,
it was good. He had his Obi-Wan Kenobi moment, which was wonderful.
Oh, that's like you're giving me all the compliments today. A joyous romp and Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is like the best. Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect Inti. I have to say that was a moment where I was writing and I didn't know what was going to happen, and that just kind of happened. And sometimes that just happens, and I was like, oh, okay, this is sooner than I thought, but we'll go with it.
Was there anything else that surprised you over the course of writing the book?
The monastery and that whole solution there came out of nowhere. That was like, they need to go somewhere, and it was like, all right, well, I'm not sure really where they're going to go. And then, just they landed on the top of this mountain range, and it was like, oh, well, here's the monastery. And so, yeah, that was an unexpected scene.
Oh, it was perfect, though, getting to see a little bit of Lillian's, like, origins.
Yeah.
This book is definitely a standalone story, but it feels like there's a lot of room within the universe for more like Gamop stories, maybe more Lillian story. Basically, there's a lot of potential for more stories, in my opinion. Do you have any plans to write more set in this world, or?
I mean, I would really like to, and I'm a little torn right now about it, but hearing it from readers is really great. Like, to hear that is really great, because on the one hand, I wrote it as a standalone, and I do feel a little bit like, you kind of close the story off and you feel like the characters now just are, this is a really weird thing to say, but I feel like sometimes characters, when you finish writing the stories with them, it's like, sure, there's more you could write, but they're okay now. They're going to go do it on their own. And I know that sounds really weird, but that's kind of how I think about it. But I do feel like there's more missions and things like that could be done. So maybe there'll be more. Yeah, it could be fun.
And if there isn't any more, I can just imagine Lillian eventually getting her hot bartender. Obviously, that's what I to.
Right? That was a total, just so you know, that was a total beta help moment too. It was like, I did not have that at the end. And one of my betas was like, Lori, hello. And I was like, what are you talking about? The romance, like, you left us hanging. And I was like, oh my gosh, I left you hanging. So I went back but clearly,
He was so cute and sweet.
It's the most romance and closest to sex you're going to get in my books.
I mean, for me, that's a perfect level.
You just left a lot to the imagination. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know who is not cute or sweet? Nave.
Yeah.
I have to say, the two, like, maybe not realistic in a sense of realism necessarily, but the two characters that I could see in our world also made me the most uncomfortable, which is Nave and the preacher. Like, I could not, I mean, they were supposed to, though, so good job.
Right.
But also, every time the preacher had dialogue, it killed me. I could not. But she got what was coming to her, so that was nice.
So what, you just didn't like the preacher made you angry, or what was it?
Yeah, something about that intersection of like religious zealousy and capitalism is just so deeply horrifying and uncomfortable.
And that comes out of like just Guy Kawasaki was hired by Apple like in the 80s, I think it was, in the 90s, to be a customer evangelist. And like, so I had done some work with an artist who's amazing, Jenny Drumgoole, who infiltrated a Paula Deen cooking show and did this like artistic intervention with the Philly cream cheese contest. And I got to know, it was amazing. And I got to know her, and I got into all this deep research about like the levels of customer evangelism and stuff. And that's kind of where I got the idea for The Preacher from. It is very disturbing.
It is. And that's another place where, like I said, there's so much overlap with our world, and people people who are so fanatical about brands and icons who maybe don't deserve the level of fanboying that happens over them. And it's something that we like to pretend doesn't happen. I like to pretend doesn't happen, and I was forced to confront it. So something I thought was fascinating about Nave, specifically our entrepreneur, our psychotic billionaire, whatever you want to call him, certainly not analogous to anyone in the real world whatsoever. His anger was such a fascinating character flaw, and how it ultimately led to his downfall. I did not come up with a question for that, but I had to say it. It was planted so early and was such like a clean through line through the whole book. The characters in this are so well-rounded and concrete in this crazy world that is just such a delight for Laline. And horrifying hellscape for some of the other ones.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I feel like all of those, right, like stereotyped criminal masterminds, right, in superhero narratives or secret agent narratives, they all have that kind of one hyperbolic, like obsessive, explosive thing about them. It's almost to the point of it being unreal. Mm-hmm. And I think it was the temper that for this one.
Am I pronouncing? It's either egregore or E. Gregory.
E. Gregory. That sounds like an e-card service. Egregore, like an egg. Okay. It's egregore. Yeah.
That was my instinct, but I wanted to double check. Is there any inspiration for them? It feels like...
Oh, yeah, it's a real thing. I mean, in terms of an idea and a concept, it's a concept that, shows up in like, I did some research. It shows up in early Hebrew texts, in Theosophy, and in like the Rosicrucian order. And so it has a like actual real world tradition. The Greek, I think it's a Greek word in origin. So I took it, and appropriated the idea and just kind of added a kind of futuristic technological component to it and wedded it together. Yeah, and egregores are weird. Like, Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny are egregores, weirdly enough. They're these kind of like things that are willed up through collective thought and then kind of become an existing thing. So long as, right, that collective believes in it, they're manifested. It's a crazy concept. I did some, I got some books on it and did a lot of like, late night internet searching for it. But yeah, it has an actual rooted kind of historical background.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I love the mix of technology with magic that we get because of the egregore in this whole process. Something about technology used in magic rituals is like a weakness for me. It's very cool.
Yeah, I think I was watching Sandman around the time when I was kind of getting to those final scenes and like that the opening moments of Sandman. There's kind of these, right, there's summoning things and stuff like that. It was definitely fun to do. A little outside my wheelhouse too. Kind of cosmic horror magic.
And then we got the payoff of Laline saving the world through the power of poetry, which is maybe my new favorite thing. It's even better than love and friendship.
Yeah, right? That's right, yeah.
All of the language play in this book was really fun. And I'm also glad that you explained it to me so I didn't have to go back and count the syllables myself. I would have done it if I had to.
I got a lot of help, I have to say, from someone who's a poet who, was one of my readers who really helped me. But yeah, it was fun. It was a learning process too, because I don't know almost anything about poetry. And so I had to really do a lot of research too, but it was fun. It was definitely fun.
Do you feel like your poetry has gotten better over the course of writing this book?
What poetry? Sarah? I don't have any poetry. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, I mean, Mm-mm.
So I take it there's not a chapbook in the future for you.
No, I don't think so.
We're not going to get some kind of follow-up, book of Lalene's poetry.
Wouldn't that be cool to do a little free little book of all of her poems? Maybe you could do it. Maybe I'll do that down the road. That would be really cute. Yeah. I really, the poetry was super fun. And I really like whether it was Tolkien or someone who would have poems and songs, or like Arkady Martine, people like that who write, in A Memory of Cult Empire and things like that with poetry. I really like linguistic things. My other series too had books and, old arcane books and texts and things like that. And that I really like putting language into science fiction. I really like it.
There's something really beautifully symmetrical about having a book be about language.
Yeah, or books within books. I love books within books. Yeah, that's really cool.
NT brings up how the technology and even the egregore are not bad things, but because they were created with bad intentions, they become bad, and how important intentions are during creation for anything and everything. And that I've missed it because I didn't manage to turn that into a question, but it was important.
That's totally true, because it's a thought form, right? And so the kinds of thoughts that you put into it are going to affect, right, what the entity is going to be like and how it's going to think. And so it isn't necessarily a bad thing. It was a lost opportunity. It was tragic for Inti, right? Because, Inti saw this as a massive moment for civilization to take the next step and go to the next level. But unfortunately, they couldn't. But, I think about like in yoga, it's like, set an intention. It's like you set this intention and it's going to permeate, right? Like your actions and what you're going to do. And yeah, it was definitely affected by the intention of the creators. Yep.
And I really liked the crossover with technology and video games as well, because a lot of this book talks about the downsides, the downsides of being locked in a virtual world and not interacting with the physical world and people around you. But it also does unlock so many amazing things, like being able to talk to someone on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
That's very cool and very good. But,
yeah,
everything can be warped.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely not like either a pro or against in any way. It's a mix, which I think it's complicated. I think that there's a lot of ways that cyberspace and other places are beautiful, liberating spaces, and also new spaces for power and predation and things like that, right? So it's like, it's always a mix of the two. There's this moment where Lalene, right, she like looks up at the stars and she says, like, this amazing contradiction where it's like easier to get from one star system to another star system than it is to cross 8 hours of land travel. And that's like one of those moments where the beauty of technology is at work and just shifts what easy is versus what's difficult. And I'm fascinated by that. I talk with my students a lot about that kind of stuff, like what's possible in virtual spaces and what's possible in physical spaces and the benefits of them. I like that.
Absolutely. This book doesn't get into it too much, but whenever the virtual space got brought up, I just thought of like how that changes accessibility. Just the capabilities
Definitely.
In this world are not as yeah, that was it. I didn't actually have a way to finish that sentence.
I hear you. I get you.
Yeah.
I was just curious about Granny Kissy.
Oh, Granny Kissy. I am glad her name was explained, because I was like on the edge of my seat the whole time. Like, why where did this come from?
I want some of her earlier adventures.
Yeah, I know. Granny Kissy prequels, right?
Yeah.
I will just say that Granny Kissy is basically like modeled off of Violet Crawley in space. So if you take like Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey and kind of move her to space, that's what you get with Granny Kissy.
Her character develops so much over the course of the book. And that's not the right word. She is the same person, but we as readers find out so much more about her and see these other sides of her. Like that sort of journey as a reader was really, really cool to go through. When she's first introduced, she's kind of a sassy grandma, right? It's like, okay.
Doing jujitsu, right? Yeah.
and you find out more and more, and you learn about these things that had, like you said earlier with the betrayal, the reader finds out that she had this information the whole time, and it really sort of changes the framing of her actions and things. And so that experience was super cool. And like,
That's
yeah,
great.
the scenes with her at the end was great. She finally complimented Lalene's poetry.
Oh, I know. That was like one of those fun moments. Yeah. Yeah, Granny was really fun to write. Secondary characters are, for me, my favorite characters to write. There's like I don't know, there's a kind of like a weight lifted off me as a writer with secondary characters. I feel freer to just kind of give them a lot more wild personalities and things, because they don't have to carry the burden of like the main narrative of the book,
Mm-hmm.
And I really like writing secondary characters. They're super fun.
I want to see her interact more with, oh no, the director.
Loudon, Asher?
Loudon.
Yes, thank you.
Asher to Granny, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Asher to Granny.
There's so much unsaid
I know
about them and between them, and I just have to live in mystery.
That's why I want the Granny Kissy prequel series.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, that would be so wild to do. I could do it. I'll have to think about it. Yeah. But that was also part of the thriller versus the space opera, I think, too, just to kind of come back around to what we were talking about earlier, is I had to kind of leave a lot of that unexplained just to keep the pacing moving, because in the space opera, it was like, I would take my time to go, whether it was like world building description or whether it was those backstories, I would just go into passages of exposition there in brief and really dig in. But with the thriller, I like had to force myself, just like drop that and keep moving. It was hard.
I mean, I don't think that we actually needed more than we got in this story. Like it's the right amount of description of her relationships and her personality. So like, I don't think that we needed more in this one book. I just want more as like her own book.
More.
Yeah.
The Granny Kissy Chronicles.
Yes.
I want to see, I loved the image we have of Liline hoping that her two owl friends hook up.
Yes.
The two owls one of them saved her life at the very beginning, and then she releases the other one from captivity at the end. You
two are like making my year with this. You're hitting on all these wonderful little nuggets in there that I really wanted to make sure were in there. That's wonderful. Yeah. Right? The kind of way that kind of comes back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. The way that animals are used in this book, well, in the book, or used by the book, but also by the characters in this book, especially when you compare that to Knave's like need for control, and so his like trying to control these wild animals, and how of course that backfires because you can't really contain nature. It was good. There wasn't a question. That's why we didn't bring it up before, but there you go.
Thank you. That's really wonderful to hear. Yeah. Those are wonderful moments sometimes where like you don't see that stuff coming and then it just kind of happens. But yeah, that really warmed my heart, I will say. Just for me to be able to kind of have her be able to do that at the end was really, like, for me as the writer, was really great too. Made me feel good.
There were a lot of really heartwarming moments at the end of the book. It was nice.
That's Becky Chambers and like inspiration rubbing off on me. Definitely.
It really changes not the book. Obviously the ending changes the book, but it goes from a dangerous kind of sad and scary adventure, but because it ends with so many like sweet things, it reframes the book. And I remember all of the like horrifying, awful characters and things that happen and existential monsters and things. It makes it hit different.
Yeah.
I mean, I think because you have these really sweet moments, like it balances out the horrible existential danger.
Yeah, that ending was a surprise to me. And, I also didn't expect that kind of a resolution, in a way, to be so sweet and so heartwarming. But I was glad when it happened. I sort of was going for we'll save the ticking clock and we'll save this thing and everyone's okay now. And all right, good job, and somehow it turned into something a little different, which is great.
Well, it felt like we got to see a little bit beyond just that, like, the end of an action movie where everyone saved the world and then they go off. We got like 10 minutes past that, just a little more.
And a little bit of proof that capitalist megalomaniacs can't take everything from us.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
We still have poetry and hot bartenders.
God damn it, and we'll write it by hand, too.
Yes. Well, I have a words are weird that is not actually a word from your book, but the content does have some overlap. So I'd like to propose skin. So the word skin is not in itself a super weird word, but it has such different contexts for use that I hadn't really stopped to think about until recently. Jonathan, you mentioned that you've started playing more video games lately, or any video games lately. And that, it broke my brain. The other day, we were playing Gloomhaven. That's not relevant. And my husband asked if I was going to wear my special skin. And obviously, he was referring to a skin I could put on my character to make them look different in the game, which is a thing in video games. But my brain just could not comprehend that. I was just stuck in the original definition. And I was like, you think I'm going to wear somebody's skin? I was so confused. It killed me. There was no way I was going to puzzle through that. It took me way too long to figure out what he was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild, right? Like what you can do now in those game spaces and like in a virtual space. I mean, it's amazing. You know, I mean, how vicariously you can kind of convert yourself into avatars and different things. It's unbelievable what the potential and possibility is.
Absolutely. And then when you get words that are so decontextualized, they just mean something entirely different.
Yeah.
We should stop reusing words. It makes everything confusing.
Well, it's interesting the way that we also use like reskin, for example, to talk about like, you know, you're reskinning code and using it in a new context, or making something different out of the same, you know, bones.
Gross.
Or what about skinny? Does skinny connect to skin? Or is that just like a completely separate word? That's
a good question. I could see like skin and bones, maybe. Like if someone's skinny, they're only skin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the etymology.
Yeah. From Middle English, skinny, resembling skin. Associated with the lack of fat or muscle.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think resembling skin is the most awkward definition of skinny that I can think of.
I know, it's very weird.
Now I'm thinking of re-skinning something, and that's the most gruesome image I've ever had in my head before.
Yeah.
De-skinning, okay, you know, but girls gotta eat.
Yeah.
Re-skinning, ugh. I guess that's just taxidermy.
It kind of.
I'm going to refer to taxidermy as re-skinning from now on.
How many reskinned heads?
Not going to get a lot of business.
It almost like euphemizes it, right? Oh, taxidermy. That's a sciencey sounding word. No, it's just re-skinning.
Obviously, Stellar Instinct has just come out, so you are hopefully taking a well-deserved break. If you're not, do you have any current projects that you're working on that you can talk about? Or
I don't right now. I'm actually in the like post-book writing simmering stage, but I have some things I'm thinking about, so I'm going to leave that one unanswered.
Very mysterious.
I have to come down. Yeah, yes. I have to come down.
And then where can you be found on the internet for listeners who want to follow you and buy your book, buy all of your books, which they should?
So I can be found at www.jonathannevair.com or at jnevair everywhere else. So Twitter, I'm now on Hive, Instagram, I am on Mastodon. At least my profile is there. But yeah, you can find me there, and Facebook.
In the virtual reality where we can all talk to each other as if we're in the same room, even if we're not. Creepy, spooky, but also very convenient. And thank you for coming on to the podcast. It was so much fun to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been wanting to come on for a long time. And the amount of attention and focus you put into talking about Stellar Instinct really does warm my heart at the ending of this, really. And you did such a wonderful job, and it's the first time I've really had an opportunity to speak about the book, so this is super special.
Well, thank you. I mean, when you first announced that the book was coming out, I was like, we got to get it on the calendar. We book up way early in advance because I'm crazy about the calendar. But I was like, we're putting it on. We need to talk about it. So thank you so much for coming on to join us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll talk soon, probably online, where everything is possible.
That's right. And it'll be yesterday.
Yes. Or a week ago, depending on when people are listening to this. Years ago, even. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram @FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.